Welcome to Tony at 12. I'm Tony LeBlanc, and today I'm in conversation with John Horton, Warden of the Alderney Bird Observatory. John, thanks for sparing me some time.
My pleasure, Tony. Thanks for having me.
That's a pleasure. First of all, let's kick off with your early interest in ornithology. That goes back to boyhood, does it?
Yeah, probably early teens. I was very much into art in my early teens, and I started sketching birds in the garden and realised that there were quite a lot of different birds coming into the garden. That really got my attention, and then got my dad's old AA book of British birds out, and it just took off from there, really.
Yeah, so it's one of those things that sort of just happened, as it were.
Yeah, almost by default, but yeah, certainly never looked back.
Now, before you came out to head up the Alderney Bird Observatory, you were in the Metropolitan Police. And can you tell us a little bit of your time there? Because I think you were involved in wildlife crimes.
Yeah, I undertook a number of roles in the Met Police, from 999 response teams to community policing. But for all of my service from 2002 to 2016, I was a wildlife crime investigator. Yeah, it's a fascinating role, very much enjoyed it, and a lot of it really was education, educating my colleagues, of which there were 35,000, that wildlife crime is actually a role that the police should be looking into, and not something to be passed on to the RSPB or the RSPCA. And I'm very proud to say that during my service, I gave the first presentation at Hendon Training School introducing wildlife crime to the curriculum of the Metropolitan Police Training School. So yeah, it was great, really enjoyed it, and I could start again tomorrow, but
yeah,
late now. I resigned last month so I can stay in Alderney.
Right, so you were on a sort of semi-secondment, were you, up until last month?
Yeah, I took a 2-year career break to come and set up the Bird Observatory in Alderney, and time, well, we've enjoyed it here so much that I just took another year, but that expired this summer, and I made the decision to stay.
So eventually you had to tell Cressida?
Yes, eventually.
Tell me all about setting up the ABO. Whose idea was it initially to have a bird observatory here?
Well, that's an interesting question. I think since I got here in the spring of 2016, I've probably met 30, 40, 50 people who told me that it was their idea of many years previous that there should be a bird observatory in Alderney. So I think really probably just right time, right place for me, taking a career and just putting it all into action, really.
So you saw the demand, you saw the interest, and you thought, well, let's have a go at it, sort of thing.
Well, Alderney just looked like the perfect place to have a bird observatory. There was no historical evidence to suggest that it would be one of Britain's leading hotspots for bird migration, but almost immediately we were making national headlines with the vast numbers of birds we were recording in terms of numbers and variety.
That's interesting. Now, you hold quite a few positions now in the Channel Islands, I believe. I saw on the, I think the news the other day that you've been elected head of Channel Island, the bird ringing scheme. But tell us about the other positions you now hold.
Yes, I was very, very proud to be elected chair of the Channel Islands bird ringing scheme. That's the first time the chairmanship has ever come to Alderney. So onwards and upwards. There's 47 bird ringing member countries in Europe, and the Channel Islands one is actually one of the oldest. It began in 1955, so it's one of the oldest and most respected. So all of the Channel Islands should be very proud of the Channel Islands bird ringing scheme. Well, what else do I do? I'm ambassador for Zeiss Optics for the Channel Islands. So I complete a blog site for them, and they very kindly supply the Bird Observatory with optical equipment and support. I'm the Alderney Bird Recorder. There's been an Alderney Bird Recorder in Alderney since Victorian times.
Gosh.
They've not always been bird watchers, but there has been an official Alderney Bird Recorder, and I took on that role when I first came to Alderney. I very much enjoyed collating all the historic records to try and bring them up to date and get a broader picture of what has and hasn't been done in Alderney over the years.
Yeah. What else?
What other roles do I undertake? I sit on the panel of the Channel Islands, the Bailiwick Islands Rare Birds panel, which is a small team of ornithological experts, if you like, who look over all the records submitted of rare birds across the Bailiwick Islands. And in fact, I'm very much hoping, through the Bird Observatory, Alderney got its first member of the Channel Islands Ringing Scheme. So that was another, not the Channel Islands Ringing Scheme, of the Rare Birds panel of the Bailiwick. So that was another first for Alderney. But now we're hoping very much to expand the Bailiwick Rare Birds Committee into a Channel Islands wide birds committee for the first time ever. And there's a long history of the positive examples of Jersey and Guernsey and the Bailiwick Islands working together, as I'm sure you know. So it's quite something to actually get all the islands working together on one project. And Jersey are looking very positive, and so are Guernsey. So that should come into fruition for next year.
Now, the economic benefits of ornithology, of bird watching, are quite immense. I mean, you see on the television from time to time, some rare bird has landed somewhere unexpectedly, and suddenly there's mixing in metaphors here, a mass migration of twitchers going to see them. And this, of course, obviously applies to Alderney as well, doesn't it? I mean, if you've got the number of species going through or actually resident, you know, it must be a big pull in terms of tourism.
Partly, it's not a pull for twitchers, bird watchers who collate lists of as many different species as they can,
right?
Because birds recorded in the Channel Islands don't actually count on their list. We're outside of the UK, so if a rare bird turns up in Alderney or Sark or one of the other islands, then they could come and see it and enjoy it, but they couldn't count it on their list, which is all important for them.
Yeah.
In terms of tourism, it has been huge for Alderney in particular, because through the Bird Observatory, we've brought wildlife holidays, specialist wildlife holiday company Nature Trek. We started leading tours for them here in 2016. And next year, we're actually running through the Bird Observatory 22 separate holidays, not just in Alderney, but across the Bailiwick. And that is a very positive economic enabler for
definitely.
And of course, there are over 6 million bird watchers in the British Isles. And since Alderney Bird Observatory appeared from nothing and nowhere, and it's become almost a household name amongst British bird watchers. And many of those have visited Alderney just to enjoy the spectacle of migration.
That's good news, absolutely. Can you tell us a bit about Alderney's indigenous birds? You know, off air we were talking about goldfinches just now, but which ones are going to be here, you know, throughout the year?
There's not a huge number of species that are here actually year round. Most of those that are here year round are garden birds. Probably our standout year-round species is the Dartford warbler, which is a very rare bird in the British Isles. And whilst we only have around 15 in a good year, 20 pairs, they stay with us year-round. They're very elusive. You wouldn't know they're here during the winter months. But we do have some resident species which are quite desirable that people want to see.
Yeah, I mean, we seem to see dunnets, which are hedge sparrows. Is that correct?
That's right, dunnets. Yeah, we very well for a variety of garden birds through the winter, and probably in terms of thinking a rarer species or species in decline, we do very well in Alderney for song thrush.
Right,
a very good share of or lots of pairs of song thrush across the island, and that may be possibly because we don't have magpies in Alderney.
Yeah, why is that, John? Because, you know, I come from Woking, and the place is stuffed full of magpies.
Yeah, it's an interesting one, that. It's especially as our surrounding neighbouring islands do have magpies, and we're only, of course, 8 miles from the French coast, which also has magpies, but we don't have them here in Alderney. In fact, the last record in Alderney of a magpie was in 1975. It's many years since one's been seen at all. I don't think that we have the habitat for them. We don't have enough of what, whilst magpies adapted to urbanise across the UK and done very well, here we don't have the classic magpie habitat of the established trees that they would prefer, perhaps, to get a kickstart, maybe.
From your point of view, is that a good or a bad thing, not having them here, or are you on the fence?
Well, all these things are always contentious.
Yeah.
I think there's little doubt that the magpies have played a role in the demise of species like song thrush, because they predate the eggs and young. Yeah. And one species does particularly well that has that behaviour as part of its lifestyle, then other species are going to suffer.
Yeah, yeah, sure, understood. What about raptors on Alderney? What have we got there?
Locally, there are not a huge variety. We've got breeding kestrels, sparrowhawks, buzzards, and barn owls. Occasionally, but not in recent years, long-eared owls. But we do fantastically well for raptors on migration. There were national headlines last year when we were the first place in the British Isles to record the bearded vulture that then passed into the UK and was resident for a couple of months, and literally hundreds of thousands of bird watchers went to see it. We have a fantastic spring migration during the month of May of honey buzzards. We can get in excess of 100 honey buzzards in a good spring, and lots of other species regularly are recorded each year that are more scarce in the UK, like black kite, for example. We also get regularly ospreys on migration, lots and lots of different types. It's not that unusual on a good day migration to record the variety of birds of prey into double figures, which is impressive anywhere in the British Isles.
What attracts them to Alderney, bearing in mind the proximity to France?
Well, I think most of them have overshot when they're travelling from the south and coming off the French coast. They see Alderney to the north. Of course, lots of them are passing over the top of Alderney, travelling to the UK, but certainly a greater number are travelling north in the spring on migration, seeing Alderney as the next stop north, realising we're a small island, and then veering off, heading back northeast into Europe. So that's why we get so many.
And the origin of a lot of these birds from the southern hemisphere or from South Europe, or what?
It's quite a mix. Most of the birds that we see on migration, which is what the Bird Observatory focuses on, are sub-Saharan migrants. But then in the autumn, and particularly if it's a very cold winter in Scandinavia and Eastern Europe, then we might see more birds moving that year than in a previous year.
And the ultimate destination from them when they're coming from the south?
Well, we've recorded this year, and in previous years, birds travelling to Finland, Norway, Sweden, are coming from as far south as South Africa. Yeah. So quite some distance, thousands of miles. So
it potentially heading up into the Arctic Circle, some of them.
Yes. Yeah. Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. It's incredible when you think about it, because, you know, distance-wise, you're talking, as you say, thousands of miles. Are they on the wing most of the time? whilst they do the migration bit, or do they, you know, sort of stop off for food and rest and this sort of thing?
Well, I think the success of locations where there are bird observatories are that they are integral stopovers for tens of thousands of birds, so that they can rest and feed and continue the next leg of their journey. There have been studies suggesting that the smaller songbirds, if you like, robins, for example, can travel 80 to 100 kilometres in a day.
That's incredible, isn't it, for a small one? Yeah.
It is.
How do they actually navigate, John? Is there something built in the brain, or is it magnetic forces, or is it the sun?
Well, I think the honest answer to that is that we don't know. The most common theory is that there is something inbuilt into a bird, its own GPS system, if you like, that's born with, and it's able to navigate. I mean, there's little doubt that birds do navigate using landmarks like the lighthouse I'm sitting in now, and continental coastlines. Other theories about birds using the stars, and perhaps a combination of all of the above. But the fact is, we're not entirely sure. Ley lines is another area that's been explored, where there's been alteration of ley lines to see if it alters the birds' migration. Okay. Global warming, obviously, that's a topic that's on everybody's mind at the present time. Is that having a big effect on the migration? Certainly, and this year I was very pleased to see that international environmental conferences recognising the monitoring of bird migration as one of the key indicators of global warming. There's no doubt that global warming is changing the migration patterns of birds. For example, there's a very pretty duck species, waterfowl species called a smew, which breeds in the Baltic. Every winter, small numbers will travel west as far as the UK. But in recent years, as the climate's got warmer and warmer in the Baltic, the birds don't need to move, so aren't travelling. So that's just one example of many species of birds which are adapting in line with global warming. And of course, as a result, probably of global warming, we've seen a lot of really fierce winds recently, gale force winds and all this sort of thing. And one poor old puffin, I think, was rescued in Guernsey and is currently in the Guernsey Society of Protection of Animals shelter. You know, what is what are the likelihoods of this happening? Presumably birds are very vulnerable to weather. Yes, and they're very much up against it. I think that's a razorbill that you, or a guillemot that you're referring to. Okay, but by way of example, we've just had 3 or 4 days, as you'll know, where the wind rarely dropped under 40 miles an hour and reached the 50s. And today we've had a day of very low wind, and we were out recording this morning, recording migration, and hundreds of birds were travelling off the continent, off the nearby French coast, passing over Alderney, some 800, 900 starlings this morning, hundreds of chaffinches and bramblings. So they've been waiting for a gap in the weather for them to continue their journeys. So yes, lots of periods of hard weather will certainly take their toll on mortality rates of birds. And of course, some of the seabirds just come onto land to nest, have their young, and spend the rest of the time at sea. What do? Do they, you know, I mean, obviously they fish, but they can't be in the air all the time. They actually settle on the sea surface, or what? Probably not for as longer periods of time as you'd imagine. There are species of birds that never land, that mate on the wing and spend their entire life on the wing. Species of terns, which are similar to a gull. Some of those spend years at a time until they're old enough to breed without actually landing. Where where the seabirds go out into Atlantic, I think is variable. I think they learn where the best fishing sites are, then spend the winter out at sea. But it is incredible that species as dainty as the puffin, right through to those which are much more robust, like the gannet, can actually spend the entire winter out in the Atlantic and survive. Extraordinary.
Yeah. Looking at the Independent recently, the newspaper, decline of the bird population in the UK is getting a bit worrying. 11% since 1970s. Farmland areas 57% since the 1970s. Seabird 28% since the 1980s. What do you put that down to? Man?
Essentially, yes, but it is a combination of things. In 1996, there were 36 species identified in the British Isles as with potential of going extinct.
Yeah.
As species in the British Isles. 25 years later, this year, that list stands at 70. So it's almost doubled in 25 years. There are a number of factors to this. Certainly global warming is one of them. Loss of habitat is probably the biggest factor. The wintering grounds, particularly for sub-Saharan migrants, where habitat's been swallowed up and destroyed. And also the migratory hotspots like Aldeny.
Yeah.
Numbers of birds are recorded. There are lots of those migratory hotspots that don't have bird observatories that are very important sites for hundreds of thousands of birds, and they may be destroyed to put a hotel resort. And then, of course, the birds have got to find somewhere else. Another factor that is certainly in the mix is the drop of the number of insects, and certainly all of our songbirds, the passerine family is the term for collective for all of our songbirds, but millions of them are dependent on being able to find food as they migrate. And at these integral stopover points where there's less habitat, there is less insects. So that's another important factor. So it is a combination of things. Mostly pretty much all down to us.
Yeah, I'm afraid most of the things in the world do tend to sort of fit that category. Can we come on to ringing now, John? Because obviously, whilst I understand that you net the birds, ring them, record them, how do you then know what they're up to? Are you reliant on other places to catch them and check them out, as it were?
Traditionally, yes, but there are, as I mentioned, 47 countries that have many thousands of ringers that are all talking to one another constantly in an age where it's very easy to talk to one another. But in more recent years, with the availability of high-powered optics and cameras, lots more birds wearing rings are being recorded by what we would call ring reads in the field, where photographers are able to see the digits on a ring and contact the ringing scheme, and that's becoming more and more prevalent alongside the hundreds of bird observatories around the world.
How many do you normally do in a year, roughly?
In Alderney, I think this year we've ringed over 13,000 birds.
Wow.
Over 12,000 of those have been songbirds.
Yeah.
Which I haven't seen the results from the rest of the British bird observatories, but I'd be very surprised if anyone's done more than that this year, which is extraordinary. But we are in a bottleneck here in Alderney at a crossroads and sit immediately under the East Atlantic Flyway, which is one of the 8 most important bird migration flyways in the world.
Do they take advantage of the jet stream?
Yes, I think so. Again, we're back to the weather. I mean, if the conditions are good and favourable, then they may overshoot us but I do think because Alderney has so much habitat and so much live food, because we have such a diverse flora in Alderney, over 1,000 species of wildflowers and the millions of insects that they attract and generate, that probably for hundreds of years, vast numbers of birds have used Alderney as a staging post.
Before we did the interview, we were talking about avian flu. Whilst this has a bad effect on British poultry, does it actually affect the birds themselves that are carrying it?
Yes, there's certainly losses. Amongst birds. It extensively affects waterfowl. In Alderney, we don't get a lot of migrating waterfowl because we don't have the habitat. So it's less likely to affect us here. But there are currently cases being recorded in the east coast of the UK where avian flu is amongst geese and swans and ducks. I believe it can affect smaller birds, but given the large numbers of birds that we see in Alderney, we've certainly not yet seen anything that would suggest that we are subject to avian flu at the moment.
Because the actual consequences to poultry farmers is devastating in terms of the fact that you have to cull your flock essentially if you get it, I believe.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, and also in Alderney, I think that beyond one or two areas where there's groups of loose chickens and one area where there's geese, I think that they're the only areas that would affect. But
yeah,
certainly locally, we don't attract flocks of geese or swans, and most of the waterfowl that we do see is in very limited numbers and tends to pass by on the coast rather than actually staying on the island and mixing with local domestic poultry and wild waterfowl.
Okay. Can you tell me about future plans for the Alderney Bird Observatory?
Yes, we're delighted to have a new observatory location this year, which is in a great spot overlooking the French coast and right slap bang in the middle of one of the island's most prominent Dartford warbler breeding habitats. So very excited about that and bringing that forward. Just in recent months, whilst we've had a very positive relationship with a number of private landowners in Alderney, and that's been key to a lot of the work that we've done, our research and being able to access different habitats. This year, we've recently been offered tracts of land on long-term lease to manage. So that is testimony to the excellent work of the Bird Observatory team, and that we have some fantastic people behind the scenes and volunteers, but working with the community has been a very positive factor from day one, and to have local landowners offering us long-term leases effectively for free so that we can manage the land for birds to ensure that those live insects are available to those birds is wonderful. So looking forward to that as a leap forward in an unexpected but very positive direction moving into 2022.
That sounds brilliant. John, thank you so much for sparing me some time. It's been a pleasure to have a chat with you about this. Hopefully we'll be able to do one perhaps this time next year to see how things have gone. And, many thanks.
My pleasure. Thank you.
And wish you a happy Christmas.
Thank you, Tony.
Okay, that's good. Thank you.